In our Sustainability Perspective series, complementing the Sustainability Awards 2020 and the Sustainable Packaging Summit, we're sharing interviews with thought leaders from across the packaging value chain. Today, I'm delighted to speak with Hery Henry, who is Head of Strategic Marketing and Corporate Social Responsibility at Wipak. He will give us some insights into the importance of transparency when it comes to the environmental impact of packaging and consumer choice, and will give his perspective on the future of packaging. So yeah, welcome Hery, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. Always a good thing to be talking to you guys.
Thank you. So yeah, to start off with, plastic packaging has had a lot of negative publicity in recent years, but it is important obviously to look at the bigger picture and also consider the positive impacts flexible packaging, for example, can have on a product's overall carbon footprint. So what would you say, how important is transparency for people to understand the real environmental impact of their purchasing decisions?
Yeah, an important point is the question that we all need to ask ourselves, regardless of what part of the supply chain we serve, is why do people not make more sustainable choices? There are a multitude of choices that are more sustainable, more circular, more recycling focused than what we choose today, whether it be in packaging or in the way we produce our food or transport, in fact. And one of the reasons we have concluded as to why people don't make more environmental choices is because there is a lack of transparency. It is difficult for people to, beyond the shadow of a doubt, understand what's the impact of my choice. And what is the comparison between 2, 3, 4 different choices? So if you think about, for instance, your regular trip to the supermarket, you're not going to go and turn around every piece of coffee, packaged coffee, to see which one comparatively is more sustainable than the other in its packaging or even in its production. You don't have the time, and you're not. The system is not transparent enough, or the data isn't transparent enough for a consumer to make an informed choice. And the same holds true for business to business, actually. So one of the things that we set out to do was that we knew we needed to cut through the so-called BS and cut beyond all of these fancy ideas of it needs to be free of plastic or free of packaging. It needs to be this and that and the other. We said we need a fact base. We need to say, okay, we need to choose a measure and say, for instance, in our case, carbon is a good measure, carbon footprint. And we home in on that and we say, okay, we need to be able to compare and contrast the carbon footprints of different types of packaging or products that they package. So that we're able to say, well, if we choose this packaging instead of another packaging, we will save, say, 60% of carbon. And of course, the whole point is to give the consumer the choice to say, well, I will pay a little bit extra, but then I am safe in the knowledge that I've made the best possible choice there is.
That sounds like a very sensible approach, definitely. Yeah, I was wondering what work does Wipak do specifically to raise awareness of the impact of benefits of different types of packaging, and obviously in particular flexible packaging, and what the carbon footprint impact could be.
I mean, I think the first thing to understand is that no one, I don't know anyone, I've never met anyone who's in favor of more packaging than necessary. I don't think anyone enjoys the fact that they get a sort of a 6 cubic foot box with a single pencil in it delivered by Amazon or have you. I think that the more interesting question is, what is adequate packaging and why do we need it? So in almost all cases, the carbon footprint, the environmental footprint of whatever is being packaged is a multitude of what the carbon footprint of the actual packaging is. So in terms of, for instance, sliced cheese, if you have 6 slices of cheese, then throwing out one of those, wasting one of those, having food waste according to one of those 6 slices, would constitute the equivalent of around 10 times the packaging or the carbon footprint of that packaging. So if we must eat cheese, we must protect it. the number one thing to do to protect the environment is to protect the product that's inside the packaging. That's the primary function of any packaging. And then the secondary question becomes, or not secondary in importance, but the second important question is, how can we minimize the packaging that we need to still get the maximum protective result? And when we've concluded that question and said, okay, we're able to choose this, this minimizes all the packaging that goes into packaging this product. And the third question becomes, how can we do it in a way that it has the smallest possible environmental footprint in terms of the packaging used? And that essentially is the equation that we need to solve, and we need to solve it transparently for the consumer so that the consumer can make a choice not just about the product that they buy and the environmental footprint of that product, but also the packaging and in fact the whole supply chain that brings the product to the table or the wardrobe of the customer.
That sounds great. Yeah. I was wondering, Wipak sets out to become the most sustainable packaging company, and I was wondering what steps the company is taking to achieve that goal.
Yeah, so the first thing that we said we needed to do was we need to ask a better question. Most companies we see asking the question of what does it take to be carbon neutral in 35, 40, 50. We said, what would it take to be carbon neutral in 2025? And we knew that that was going to be a massive stretch goal. We knew that that was going to be difficult at best, but we also knew that the best way to make great progress and to become the most sustainable packaging company on earth requires to ask a better question, a more difficult question, because you get more interesting answers. People asked, how can we go and fly to the moon? They didn't go, how can we go and fly to the moon in 2000 years, right? And then the second step was we needed transparency. So we needed to measure the carbon footprint of each of our products all the way down to the product level. So we're able to today say, well, this little spouted pouch with yogurt in it, it has the carbon footprint X, Y, Z. Then the second step was, once we understood what our carbon footprint consists of, and actually this won't come as a surprise to anyone in the packaging industry, I don't think, the low-hanging fruit, around 12 to 15%, is energy. So that one was easy. And we just said, okay, we're going to switch all energy to green energy. And the only constraint to that is that we have existing contracts that we want to honor. So by now, for instance, all of our Nordic production sites are completely run on green energy. And so is Poland has been agreed as well, and the other plants will follow suit shortly. Then the second one, a tad more tricky, if you will, 80% or 81% even of our carbon footprint is actually the raw materials. So as you know, plastic packaging is a wonderfully effective, flexible packaging is a wonderfully environmentally effective way to package. We package 40% of all goods in the European Union with flexibles, but it only constitutes the plastic amount of 10%, right? So because it's so much lighter than rigids, for instance. So it's a good way to package, but it is, of course, mostly crude oil based at this moment, which means that it has a heavy environmental footprint in the conception phase. So when the material is actually made, before we even form it into packaging, it already has a very high carbon footprint. And so we said, okay, so then that means that we actually need to, first of all, down gauge. So we need to make sure that we make thinner materials, high-tech materials that protects just as well as even better. And of course, we've always done that, and we continue to do that. And then, so just reducing the amount of plastic in the packaging. But then the second one was, we need to make sure that it's fully recyclable in the first instance, in the first step. So we're seeing a move towards from recyclates and fully recyclable. And then, of course, the final step in that equation is we need to get away from crude oil. We need to get into a bio-base, and that, of course, is slightly more difficult. Anyone in packaging understands this. I mean, we can't just go and say, dear suppliers, provide us bio-based fuels. First of all, we need to know that they're from good sources, like FSC certified wood, for instance, in the Nordics, where we know that the certification stands for sustainable practices. But also, if you go to a supplier and say, well, I'd like to triple, quadruple the tonnage of bio-based resins, then the supplier will say, well, that's wonderful, let's work together. It'll take a few years to build a new factory. So the supply isn't there yet, just now, but it will be. And we've made a bet on the only thing that we think is the right thing to do, which is that the future must reward recyclability and a low carbon footprint, and it must incentivize, whether that's fiscal stimulus or something else, but it must incentivize the use of those kind of packaging types that are actually objectively better for the environment, fostering circularity, fostering recyclability, and fostering a lower carbon footprint in all parts of the value chain.
Thank you. Yes, I wanted to come back to the topic of consumer choice briefly again, and I was wondering what would you say, what factors influence consumer choice when it comes to buying products in different packages, and also how can consumers be given the best available information in order to make the most sustainable choice?
We'll have to blue ocean it a little bit, because clearly the that transparency that we've talked about earlier isn't in place yet, right? But one of the things that heavily influences consumers is, of course, is information, information coupled with emotion. So we still see a large number of politicians. Just last week, it was someone on the French ministerial level in Paris saying that we must do everything we can to fight a war on plastics, and to get rid of plastic packaging. And I just thought, well, yes and no, right? So what we must do is we must protect Earth. So if we suggest to the public, and we inform the public that everyone should make a choice towards, for instance, biodegradables in this moment, then that would be very destructive to the environment. And I'm again, people think I'm hating on biodegradables. I most certainly am not. I'm saying we saw it with windmills and wind energy and solar energy 20 years ago. It was a good technology, but it wasn't an efficient technology. So we must explore all these avenues, and in the meantime, we must make choices today that are environmentally sustainable today and tomorrow. And part of that is educating ourselves and educating the public. So I'll give you an example from a very recent seminar, with two seminars actually this autumn, where I spoke as a keynote at conferences, and I asked the audience, and this is all people in packaging and technical people, I asked, what do you think the environmental footprint is made up of in a packaging company? And roughly 30% guessed that it was the raw material. And the most popular was transport. Transport is nothing. Transport is 3 to 5%. Transport does not matter in the grand scheme of things. So even experts and people in our industry, and people who really think about these things a lot, don't have complete clarity, because as a topic, compared to many other topics, this is quite a new topic. So we've all grown up with the emissions from cars. We've all talked about the emissions from cars our whole lives. We haven't talked about a more sustainable packaging supply chain for all that long, with the piety and seriousness that we see today. And therein lies the opportunity in having facts and informing the public and informing. And I think now, when I get back to my idea with the blue oceaning, I think we need to very quickly innovate a way to inform large scale. I mean, the supermarket tells us what is bio-based, and the supermarket tells us what's vegan. Why couldn't the supermarket tell us what is environmentally produced and environmentally packaged? We can do that. By the way, all studies indicate that whether we ask Mexicans, Chinese, Germans, or Englishmen, the large majority of the population wants to make environmentally conscious choices, and is willing to pay that little bit more for knowing. So then again, we ask, people say they would, but why don't they? And I'm an optimist, so I believe the only reason here is that it's not apparent to people what is the environmental choice to make. And when we don't, when we're not clear and transparent on the choices, then what happens is we choose either convenience or what feels right, or a combination of those two. So of course, for example, something that's easily and readily available and that doesn't require me to take any steps, for instance, in taking it to a recycling space, is a convenient choice. And if that goes hand in hand with something that is environmentally sourced and it's called home compostable, then of course that makes sense to me as a consumer. And I just hope that that's the right thing to do. But I buy myself a clean conscience with that. And so we need to combat these kind of trends with facts, and we need to help each other out in making the right choices. And by the way, this is not just a consumer question. This is also a question for B2B. This is a question for the whole value chain. This is a question about how we want to live our lives in the future. And this is a question about city planning, infrastructure, fiscal infrastructure, stimuli to stimulate the right kind of behavior, and essentially a pact for the future that we make with our children.
Absolutely, yes. Some great points there. And in conclusion, I was wondering, on a sort of very broad level, how do you see the future of packaging?
I see an incredibly bright future for packaging, but I'm not, and I don't want to sound blasphemous as a packaging guy, but I don't worry for or about packaging. What I worry about is building integrated structures that allow for circularity, and where all parts of the value chain are integrated in a sustainable fashion. So packaging has an important role to play, but is not the only player. And what I see is that we will integrate that value chain to, for instance, allow for sustainable choices already in the design phase of a product for packaging as well, or in the design phase of a new type of packaging or a marketing campaign or a brand, so that from the beginning, sustainability is a design criteria for the whole value chain and indeed for the supply chain. So, for instance, the shape of your packaging has a big impact on the amount of the product that can be used if it's a food product and that doesn't go to waste because it's not stuck in the corners of a package, but also on how easily it's packaged and transported safely and how much space it takes up on a truck. So design for circularity and by extension sustainability is the future, not just of packaging, but all adjacent value chains.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Hery. That's all we've got time for today, unfortunately. Our Sustainable Packaging Summit is now finished, but we'll continue the discussion in 2021 with more discussion panels, interviews and commentary in the new year. Subscribe to Packaging Europe or follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter if you'd like to keep up to date. So yeah, thank you very much, Hery, for joining me today, and thanks everybody for tuning in.
Always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.